Your morning wake-up call. David Zublick's Awake Nation. Truth with a shot of espresso starts now.
What do I know? And you know what? We're going to take a little bit more and go a little woo here, because joining us now is Jesse Beltran. Their website, cosmicclarityconnections.org, and this is the Mind Nexus. How you doing, Jesse? Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, listen, I'm fascinated by this. Tell us a little bit about Mind Nexus. Tell us a little bit about your website and what it is you want to let our viewers know about today.
Yeah, well, Mind Nexus was created to merge a plethora of different experts in different fields and backgrounds so that we can disseminate truth to what most would call the general population. My interest specifically is just to tell your audience a little bit about my background. I'm a retired firefighter paramedic from the city of Sacramento.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was my pleasure. And my background is in technology. I was self-taught and eventually was partner and owner of the third largest internet service provider in the state of California. And then I became the president for an organization called the International Center Against Covert Technologies. And how that developed was there was a phenomenon that I was introduced to that was going on here in the United States. And how that began is there was a group of people, hundreds of people, complaining about anomalous health incidences. And recently, the Department of Homeland Security has admitted that this phenomenon exists, and it's sometimes called—
Talking about Havana Syndrome?
Havana Syndrome, correct. Mm-hmm. 2 months ago, they did a hearing and had witness testimony, and the bottom line is that they're saying that this phenomenon exists and it started in 2014. But they're only admitting that it's happening to federal employees, diplomats, CIA agents, FBI agents, and so forth.
Do you remember the Navy Yard shooter? That was around 2014, and and he was saying he was like hearing voices, and he went in and shot. Or is that different than Havana Syndrome?
No, that's exactly what we're talking about. And in fact, Aaron Alexis contacted me before he did that. And he was reaching out for help, both him and there's another gentleman by the name of Myron May, who was an attorney. And they were experiencing these symptoms, which are exactly what these federal employees, these diplomats, and everything that the testimony was given about the symptoms that someone would have is experiencing. And in Congress, the testimony was saying that the number one complaint that these diplomats were having was they were hearing these strange noises. And I'm going to step back. Back in 2010, 2011, there was a couple of cases that came to my attention. One was a gentleman by the name of James Walbert. And James Walbert was non-consensually implanted with a chip. He provided enough evidence in our court systems in which a protective order was issued for him. He had medical imagery, he had toxicology reports and so forth that substantiated his claim, and therefore there was enough evidence to issue the order. In speaking to James, he connected me with a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Hall out of Texas. And Dr. John Hall is the author of a couple of books that are out there. The first one was A New Breed: Satellite Terrorism in America. And it spoke about this phenomenon. It happened to a person he was in a relationship with. His second book is called Guinea Pigs: Technologies of Control. Okay. Now, I met Dr. Hall in Texas, and we were discussing this topic, and I asked, well, why isn't anything being done about this? And he said, is because if you went and spoke about this to your medical physician, which everyone is taught to do and conditioned to do, they automatically railroad them into the mental health industry and where they're re-victimized. Now, the government officially is saying that this started in 2014 because our diplomats in Havana were talking about having this phenomena happen to them and to their families. But in fact, it was happening all over the world. And we have been documenting and following this phenomena. I can tell you since late 2009, 2010, we started gathering the data. And when I spoke to Dr. Hall in Texas, that was my question to him. Why isn't anything being done about it? And as he explained that, and I said, well, why aren't we doing mass testing? He was doing sporadic radio frequency testing on victims who were claiming that they were experiencing this phenomenon. So I said, well, why don't we just do it on a mass scale? So I started in Sacramento, California, and our first meeting, when we advertised that we were going to be doing this, I had 100 people show up. I was surprised, and they were all complaining about the exact same thing. All their symptoms, everything was the same, and that would be strange sounds, concussion feelings to their head, dizziness, nausea, severe headaches, electrical shocks to the extremities, involuntary muscle movements. These were all systematically the same. Now, in our second meeting, we held this in Davis, California. 300 people showed up, again, with the same type of complaint. So in the hearing at the Department of Homeland Security, when they were holding this hearing, they were asked a question. They were asked, are you aware of this phenomenon happening to non-federal employees? And their answer was, and they sort of sidestepped it. They said they only address federal employees. The attorney that was giving testimony there said, well, if you look at his Twitter feed, you might say there are a lot of complaints of the general population, but he himself says he only represents federal employees. Now, we have documentation of literally hundreds into the thousands of people who have been complaining about this since 2009 and 10. In fact, in 2011, the President Bioethics Commission, which was constructed under President Obama, headed by the head chair was Amy Gutman, who is now our diplomat to Germany. They held a hearing, and there were 300 victims who wanted to give testimony on the list there. And I've given you some links and access to documentation that you can see that all these reports are substantiated. And Dr. John Hall actually gave testimony there. And his position was about there appears to be some type of experimentation going on. And we truly believe that by the data, that the majority of it was experimentation back in 2010, 2011. Interesting statistics is when I started in Sacramento doing this, the majority of the victims were Caucasian, predominantly female, higher educated, single, widowed, or recently divorced. Then the second subsection would be Caucasian males, then African American females, and then males, then Asians, and then it dwindled down in ethnicity as the data became more apparent. As we transitioned to the Midwest, the statistics were the same until we got to the Chicago area, where it sort of flipped a little bit, where the majority of the victims were African American females, then African American males, then Caucasian females, Caucasian males, Asians, and then it dwindled down. And it stayed that way towards the East Coast. So East Coast versus the West Coast, there was a little bit of a flip with those dynamics. And I was doing RF scans, and we were taking surveys and getting data of how these people felt, when this started, when do they feel they were victimized. All of them say this, that they are suffering, and it is torturous. And if you listen to the complaints of our diplomats, our agents, and our government officials who are experiencing this, they're all complaining about the same exact thing. There was a unique subset, one group that I was invited to speak to up in Virginia, and it was somewhere around 100 to 130 people. What was unusual about this group is they were all military subcontractors. Now,
Hmm.
I have been practicing hypnosis since early 2000s. I became a certified master hypnotherapist with a diploma in hypnotherapy in 2014. And there was a strategic reason why I did this. As I was going across the United States, I started to see who was most affected. And there was a category. You had those who were severely affected by this, those who were moderately affected, and then those who were low to moderate. And when I say affected, it means being able to carry on a normal life, carry a job.
What are some of the symptoms again?
Yeah,
That people were feeling?
yeah. Usually, what they hear is a an acute onset of a strange sound. It's almost electronic. It could be anything. Usually, what they complain about is a high pitched frequency, which is around the 10 kilohertz to 11 kilohertz range.
Okay.
Um, it would be similar like if you heard an explosion and your ears were ringing. But the difference here is they complain about it. It's almost as someone is controlling the volume on a knob and turning it up and down. Now, if you go to your physician with this, most of the time they're going to diagnose it as tinnitus or Meniere's disease, something like that.
Right, right.
But but tinnitus doesn't do that. It can turn on. You can get the symptoms on and off, but it's not like someone's constantly turning up and down the volume. Um, the other symptoms are going to be, like I said, it's going to be brain fog, short-term memory loss, migraines, um, shocks to the extremities. Um, there's a whole sleep deprivation, which is the biggest complaint, and then you start having a whole other bunch of symptoms when you start becoming fatigued and so forth. Now, the initial onset when someone experiences this is this fight or flight response. And when you speak about Aaron Alexis and Myron May, for example, those two specifically were in fight mode. They were not going to be patient because when I was explaining to them what needed to happen, as I said, this is not a quick fix. This is a long journey that you're in for. And had I had known what they were going to do, I keep thinking it over and over in my mind. Was there anything different I could have done? And I don't think there was, because no one could have predicted what they were planning to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
What do you think was the reason that these people were targeted? Why would someone subject people to this syndrome? What are they trying to get from them?
Okay. So the majority in our statistical gathering, the majority of the victims, like I say, we feel probably was experimentation. There was another subset of people who were affected this way, and these were whistleblowers or individuals who had really rubbed someone in a position of power in a wrong way.
Okay.
Those were the three categories.
So it wasn't enough to kill them, but just to make them sick. Do you suspect that this was some sort of an electronic device which was emanating these frequencies, which gave these people these symptoms? And if so, how do you suspect it was being done?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. If you listen to retired Lieutenant Colonel Egring's testimony, he says the whole methodology initially is to discredit someone. It's to make them look crazy.
Right.
And he says that right there in open Congress. He also says that because of security clearances and classified information, that if they put him in a skiff, he would tell Congress exactly who they need to subpoena and go after. He knows what doors to open. So they know who is doing this, but they're not disclosing this openly. Okay.
So wait a minute. So he can't disclose it unless he's in a skiff. So does that give us a clue as to who it could be? Like
Mhm.
only certain people you can't say.
Well, I will say this is what we are finding as there's a phenomenon you may have heard. It's called voice to skull,
Yeah.
and this is what Lieutenant Colonel Egren is describing. So the sounds that they're hearing is 24/7, 365 days a year in certain circumstances. Um, what we found is we do have some cases currently where we do the RF scanning around a person's vicinity, and we use what was called a JM20 Pro, and it's a radio frequency detector, general frequency detector, and you're allowed to calibrate it so where you can be within 2 inches of the emission. So, because we live in a wireless society, that's important that we have something like that. So we can do that in a preliminary environment on a large scale. So that's what it allowed us to do. Then some of our uh, participants would get medical imagery, whether it be an MRI scan, CT scan, panoramic X-rays, toxicology reports. Um, that was other evidence that they were gathering, because just because you have an RF emission around your person, you can't really draw any conclusions. You need other data to dial in on what you think is really going on. And then,
Forgive me for interrupting, but what I'm trying to understand is, can these people be targeted so specifically that they could be in the same room with someone else and the other person is not experiencing this symptom, but they are? It's, in other words, it's tuned specifically to the one individual.
that is correct.
Wow.
So what I was getting to is that some of these victims also had what is called a linear junction scan. And a linear junction scan is a way of scanning someone to see if they have some type of technology in them, specifically ferrous materials. I mean, so it'll send out a first echo, and whether it's active or passive, what the linear junction scan is will activate the passive tech in addition, so you can pick up a frequency. So where are we now? We do have individuals who are getting surgeries and removing these devices. And so I've always said this, and I know some of my colleagues out there have said, well, this is an EMP weapon, which Colonel Egren describes.
Right.
And so you think about this, and I said, let's use a common sense approach. If the data is correct and what we believe is happening, then this frequency that's being sent out is hitting everyone in the general population. But why are only certain individuals specifically having these symptoms? And I've always felt this from the get-go, is that it's because they have to have a mechanism to receive that signal. And that
Yeah.
signal ended up being these devices. And so we have several cases down in Southern California. Mr. Larson, the Larson case, he was a politician. He had multiple devices removed from his body, his person, over 10. And it ended up being a medical company. And he sued, and it was thrown out because he inadvertently signed up to participate in an
Do
experiment.
you
The
know what the name
problem
of
there,
that medical company
Dave
was?
Larson,
What was
Dave
it?
Larson. If you look at the Dave Larson report,
Dave
which
Larson.
yeah, the Dave Larson report, you will see these devices. And this was over a decade ago. They were down to the size of the numerical number on a penny. Today, they're even smaller than that.
Jesse, what are the chances that, I wrote a science fiction novel where everyone was being turned into cyborg puppet avatars through covert nanotech? What are the chances that, like, because you hear, like, we don't hear about technology from the government until 50 years later. So if 10 years ago they had it that size, what are the chances they could just spray this stuff in the air or put it in our water and then
Yeah,
still maybe selectively zap us and activate us? Or
yeah.
if we all had this stuff in us, like that's kind of what happened in my book. It's like a pollutant that gets in you, and then some people escape and detox and try to keep lower levels so that they literally can't just be zapped.
Mhm. Well, I've always taken the position to only speak about what I can uh, prove. Um, Theoretically, if they're smaller than the numerical data on a penny, and I do know for a fact that I've spoken to someone who worked in the Pentagon, and he happened to be one of my wife's best friends in college, and he was a overachiever, and he was an independent military subcontractor. When I was there to visit those military subcontractors who had asked me to come see them, he invited my wife's friend had invited us over to visit, and he wanted to know why I was there, and I just sort of subtly explained why I was there, and then we talked about these implants, and he goes, "Oh, we can tell you exactly what year these were being used." And he says, "But if it happens today, you're SOL." He says they are so small, no medical imagery, nothing can detect those, with the exception of RF devices. And so you have to go outside the medical industry to someone who's more in the tech industry who knows about radio frequencies and these RF emissions in order to test for them. And that's where we're at today. So, but theoretically, if you can get them down to, uh, you know, these nano sizes, I guess anything's possible.
And you're a hypnotist, so what are, from your experience, not in my science fiction world, but in reality, can they use this to send and receive, like almost hypnotize a person essentially with this technology? Is that kind of what, like, I know people are like, oh, I hear something, but is there any evidence of literally like changing their thoughts and completely just
Well, that's the exact reason why I became a certified master hypnotist, because the people who are most vulnerable are those who have a personality trait that we would classify as highly suggestible or somnambulous. What does that mean? That means that these people, most of the time, are in an altered state. You can manipulate them to do almost anything. And Aaron, Alexis, and Myron May would have fit under that category. This puts you in an altered state, period. And we are human beings, and we transition through different states of consciousness every day, every waking moment. We are naturally like this. So if you look at history, Ewan Cameron, who was a Canadian um, psychiatrist who was hired by the United States to do experiments on people to see if they could erase their brains and put false memories back in. And he would use techniques like drug therapy, long-term sleep. They would use a thing called psychic driving. And this is the thing that should stand out to everyone. What is psychic driving? He would get a helmet and they would play these tapes to these individuals and repeat themes over and over and over again over long periods of time. We're talking months sometimes. So now let's go back to where are we today? What are the main complaints of our diplomats and our CIA agents and FBI agents? They talk about this unusual sound. Now they can transmit this sound 24/7, 365 days a year. And it's psychic driving on steroids. So you do this to someone who's highly suggestible, you can get them to do just about anything and they won't even remember it. And that's where we're at today.
Now, your research indicated that a lot of these people had some sort of implant put in their bodies or their brains prior to being subjected to these frequencies, and that explained why someone could be in a room with somebody else and one person wouldn't experience it in this way. How would they have gotten these implants into their brain without them knowing about it? Would have been during some other surgery, and were they targeted for that implant? I mean, when did that happen? How did that happen?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that these are in their brains. Okay.
It could be another part of their body.
Yeah, it's in a part of their body, and what happens is there's a modulated signal that comes into an implant, and then it's demodulated to where the brain can interpret what that message or sound is supposed to be. And basically, what we're finding is this is done through bone conduction.
Okay.
And how do we know? Is because we've been able to utilize um, piezoelectric transducers and put it on the human skin, and you can actually record the modulated signal. That's one way. Now, you asked how is this being done? I can tell you the only ones that I'm talking about are implants that were removed are in the cases that they have physically identified these because they're foreign bodies until you pull it out and you identify that. Not everyone that we've scanned has had all of these procedures done because it's very expensive. And typically, what happens is once this happens to you, and you may know someone in your family that talks about these weird phenomena that they're experiencing. They're hearing things that aren't there. They're having these electrical shocks. Their body's moving uncontrollably. Now, it's not to say that there isn't a medical condition that might cause some of these, but with this phenomenon, I've only known the circumstances to include all of this for people who have been exposed to this phenomenon called the Havana Syndrome or anomalous health incidences, which is a new term that's popular today that the government is using. How did they get in? Some of them, they visited a dentist. Some of them claim that they've had vaccinations. Some of them have claimed that they had a particular surgical procedure done in that particular location that was coming up positive for an RF emission.
Wow. This is, I would love, we're running out of time, but I would love to have you back to discuss this further. Tell us a little bit about your website and how people can get in contact with you and learn more.
Yeah. So if you go to mindnexuslive.com, we're going to be having an event in Tucson, Arizona. It's something that hasn't been done in this unique capacity before. Like I said, we have experts from all different fields that will be there. We have psychologists, Dr. Alex Bloom, Dr. John Hall, who is one of the forefront experts in this field. I will be speaking, and I will also be demonstrating how you can do this covertly to a person, just utilizing language. Now, imagine if you're transmitting what I know to someone 24/7. You can really mess with someone if you're very unethical. Okay. We have spiritualists that'll be there because the whole thing is, where do we go from here? We really need to get away from the negativity. We need to bring everyone together, and we need to make our decisions with love and positivity. That's the goal there. It's a 3-day event. 2 of the nights are catered dinner. There'll be opportunities for you to speak with all the speakers. Ben Chastain will be there. Carrie Cassidy will be there. Dr. Jamal, who is out of Arizona, and John D'Souza, if you've heard that name before.
Yes, yeah, I know.
John D'Souza will also be one of our keynote speakers there. So it's going to be a fun event. You'll get to mingle and ask questions. You'll get to speak with and network with like-minded people there. So definitely go to mynexuslive.com.
Very good.
Do have a, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There is if you go to that website, if you're curious about what your suggestibility acuity is, you can go to mynexuslive.com and click on suggestibility. There's a couple of quizzes you can take. If you fall under the highly suggestible area, it'll automatically flag us and we'll reach out to you.
Sounds fantastic. Well, as I said, I'd love to have you back. I'll have my executive producer get in touch with you. Keep us posted. This is really an important topic, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today, Jesse. We'll talk to you again soon, okay?
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So much. All right.
You guys have a wonderful day.
You too. Jesse Beltran here on the Awake Nation. Fascinating individual, huh?
That's really cool. I mean, I love all the technological aspects of it. And Amy Holem, I guess she's really onto something because what he's saying ties into that with the different frequencies coming off the people, I guess. So
well, yeah, she deals with this. She deals with this all the time. So this is wow, incredible. All right. First of all, thoughts on the show today? I thought you did a great job as always. Thank you for your valuable input and for filling in and for your tremendous questions for Gary Wayne.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just saying I'll say to everyone in the audience, sorry, I'm like a rainbow colored person today because my house was getting ready to sell. And so we had it painted and there's no curtains on my door. So every time the clouds move, the lighting changes. So if you've noticed, I've changed from like Smurfette to
No,
bright
you look great.
red.
You look great. It's been and I really Heather's our associate producer. She's also the head of our trauma triage team and the author of the book AI 2030. Please go to Amazon and get that
Oh,
today.
thank you.